White Dog by Ann Runacres. Following an intense period of work, Miss Flowerdew decided to take a short holiday to recharge her batteries, and having considered foreign travel, discarded that possibility and looked closer to home. She had often heard that the county of Worcestershire was particularly scenic, and not having had occasion to visit that area, she was persuaded to investigate the claim. Diligent perusal of her AA book of bed and breakfast accommodation revealed a pleasant hostelry where evening meals could be provided if required, which suited her perfectly. The drive down to the Swan Inn was accomplished without any false turns in the road, and she arrived in the late afternoon. With her evening meal arranged, she sauntered along the road outside to take some exercise and collect any ideas on where she would wander the following day. Miss Flowerdew was solitary by nature. She had never married, but this had not impeded her enjoyment of life. Her work as an accountant kept her busy, and in her spare time she painted. Much of her artwork was tucked away in a cupboard, but occasionally she would review old pieces and mentally take note of where they could be improved. One or two with which she had been particularly satisfied were framed and hung in her lounge. Thus it will be apparent that her hobby of watercolours provided a welcome concentration which absorbed a great amount of her leisure time. During the meal that evening, she was able to glean some advice on possible walks, including her plans regarding painting venues. Consequently, the following day, finding the weather to be particularly dry and warm, she set off on her first walk, carrying her painting equipment. After half an hour, she discovered a gently sloping field with a fine view of a valley and a church, and this absorbed her for the morning, ending with a generous packed lunch provided by the Swan. The morning's efforts having dried, she packed the easel and continued further along the narrow lane. Just out of sight, she heard the sound of children chattering, and it became clear as she drew nearer that they were playing in a field close to the lane. The voices became more distinct, and she overheard two small girls talking together. Reaching the gate, she leaned over, curious to see what entertained them, but could see nothing. The voices stopped abruptly. It seemed strange, but not enough to invite further investigation, so she continued her walk. That evening, feeling very satisfied with the success of her first day, she admitted as such when the barman politely inquired. Not being conversant with regular school times, Miss Flowerdew mentioned the two children, but the barman announced that no local children could be about the area, as the village was some distance away. Perhaps they were visitors with their parents out for a day trip, it was suggested. Miss Flowerdew agreed that this must be so, and dismissed the incidents as of no importance. The next morning offered a clear, sunny day, and she rose with anticipation of another enjoyable time sketching and painting. A walk in the opposite direction proved not so generous in regard to views, and although she spent the morning sketching an interesting oak tree, she felt drawn back to her previous area. The gate into the children's field was easily climbed, and Miss Flowerdew discovered there was an excellent subject for study in the shape of a small cottage further into the field. It was a typical black and white thatched cottage, with a curl of smoke issuing from the chimney. Not wishing to sketch the obvious view, she walked down the field until she discovered an indistinct path leading towards the cottage. The steps were of irregular stones laid at intervals, and these led to a worn wooden gate before continuing beyond up to the front door. Feeling permission should be obtained, she knocked. There was no reply, but there was the sound of children again coming from the garden. However, upon circumventing the building, she could find no trace of children or adults, and so accepted that her sketching should be achieved from a polite distance. Settling in the field, she proceeded to do so. But on glancing up to check her perspective, she chanced to see the two girls running by the hedge near the cottage. Their long hair bounced in the breeze, ribbons falling gaily out of place, and their flowery dresses swirled under long white aprons. The girls giggled and jumped and chased each other with a carelessness young children will always have when not supervised by adults. Miss Flowerdew found herself smiling at their freedom. A feeling of happy contentment swept over her, and her painting paused as she watched their games. The following day, she decided to visit Worcester Cathedral for more inspiration, and consequently the field and the girls were forgotten. But although the cathedral gave plenty of scope for sketching, the next day she found herself wandering back to the children's field. She had hardly set up her equipment before they appeared again near the cottage. They had brought a companion, a little white dog, which enjoyed their games even more, causing plenty of shrieks of delight from the girls and excited barking from the dog. Miss Flowerdew spent less time sketching and painting, and more time watching their games. Again, with the glow of happiness and contentment they seemed to spread towards her. This time they played further into the field, finding the bough of an old oak which nearly touched the ground. This became a perfect swing, and when the dog was swept into their arms, all three bounced and giggled in delight. Miss Flowerdew couldn't help laughing at this sight, and this startled the three. As all small animals will, they froze and stared. She raised a hand and waved to them. After a short pause, the girls waved back, but then darted back to the cottage, calling the dog. A vague feeling of regret and guilt stole over her. She'd spoiled their fun, and they had vanished so quickly. The comforting solitude which was there a moment before was gone with the children. The sketch lost its appeal, so she packed and returned to the Swan. In the following days, she tended to frequent the children's field more and more, watching their innocent play, sometimes with their dog, sometimes with toys brought from the cottage. She found that if she kept perfectly still, they accepted her presence, and occasionally drifted nearer, so that she could hear their chatter. These were soothing, drifting days, with the soft rustling of the leaves above her head, and the birds flitting and calling around the field. Now she attempted to sketch the girls, and eventually, very shyly, they came to see her work. Not in the way of adults wishing to criticise or praise, but merely to observe the method very seriously, and then run off for another game. No words were exchanged, none were ever needed. The girls and their dog were part of the field, the trees, the birds. There was no need for conversation. What was there to say but to live in the moment? On her final evening, the barman asked if she had enjoyed her holiday. Miss Flowerdew smiled gently, and broke her usual reticence to describe her days with her happy companions. The barman looked puzzled. The cottage she mentioned no longer existed. It had burnt down years ago. A family had lived there, back in the early 1900s. A farm worker, his wife, and two girls. Did they own a small white dog? Miss Flowerdew asked. The barman raised his eyebrows. He didn't know. But did it really matter?